Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Cincinnati Ballet's Story Choreography Project. This evening's interview is with our resident choreographer, Jennifer Archibald, and we're going to talk about choreography and physical storytelling. My name is Carolyn Guido Clifford, and I am the Director of Education and Community Engagement here at Cincinnati Ballet, and I'm so excited to introduce you all to our choreographer tonight. As you have questions, either about where you are in your process for story choreography or for our amazing choreographer, please drop them in the comment section and we will be thrilled to answer them live. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome our choreographer this evening, Jennifer Archibald.
Hi, everyone.
Hey. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to go ahead and dive right in. And I'm going to ask you the question that we're asking all of our choreographers first. So, Jennifer, how do you define the word choreography?
For me, it's really about just making movement from an honest place. And when you're, it's storytelling, and it's about making the audience feel something while they're in the theater, and also having the audience remember certain moments so that whatever they've seen on stage can resonate when they've left the theater.
So how do you kind of hone in on some of those special moments, or do you find that your audience kind of is different from what you think those moments are going to be?
I mean, you never know how the audience is going to read your work. You know, what the climax of your work can be very different. Will fall on an audience member's body and mind in a different way. But what I will say is that I think if you create movement from a truthful experience or a truthful response, then it will read. It will read well.
That makes sense. So how did you start choreographing? What's your journey been like to become a choreographer?
I've wanted to choreograph since I was a little girl. So I was improvising a lot as a child in my home, and I was always like making dances. I was making dances
so
in
that
elementary school.
Improvise might be new to some of our audience. Do you mind defining it a little bit for us?
Oh, improvising. Well, I mean, from a dancer's perspective, you could put music on and you can just begin to move. So there's no like real structure. It just comes from like this natural, organic place within you, and you begin to move through space freely. I think the idea of moving, the word of freedom is super important in that answer, because when you improvise, you have to be completely vulnerable and completely free in order for you to achieve that conversation with yourself, because it's it's a moment where you turn all the lights off and you have the music playing and you're in there by yourself, right? So yeah, I was improvising as a child, and I was doing it. I've pretty much carried that ability to improv throughout my career, because when I choreograph, I am improvising in the studio. So I'm not the choreographer that walks around with a pad and paper. With a pad and pen. I just am choreographing on the spot. So I would say, accessing those improv skills has just been something that was kind of innate from when I was a child.
Cool. So I think I cut you off a little bit about your journey. So you started by improvising and you wanted to do it as a child. What were the next steps to becoming a choreographer?
I think my parents knew that there was definitely this love for dance. So I ended up going to a high school of the arts, and then I went to university for dance. And then I ended up seeing the Alvin Ailey Dance Company perform in Toronto. And when they performed in Toronto, I knew that I needed to be in a space where I had teachers that could challenge me and be in an environment that was just, I wanted to go to that school of fame. I wanted to be around artists all the time. So when I had the opportunity to go to New York City, I was able to I took that step and I went to New York City and finished the ALE program and had been choreographing throughout all those different academic phases of my life. And I think I had always wanted to choreograph more than I wanted to perform for a specific company, which is not usually the norm for a lot of young dancers.
Mhm.
But I do think that being technically trained and understanding technique and applying that to my choreographic voice was definitely helpful. And
Awesome.
I've been in New York ever since, so that's where I'm based.
Oh, cool. So, everyone, if you're just joining us, my name is Carolyn. I'm the Director of Education here at Cincinnati Ballet, and I'm here with an awesome guest, Jennifer Archibald, and she's talking to us about choreography. She's talked about her journey, and now we're going to dive into a little bit more specific questions. So, why dance? Why is dance that medium for storytelling? I noticed on your resume you have some other like theatrical techniques and some other things going on. So why is dance a good medium?
I don't even know how to say why it's good. I just know that I couldn't do anything else, in the sense of I didn't want to do anything else. Like working in an office just is not, I just know that that wouldn't make me happy. So I think when you decide to be an artist or a dancer at a young age, it's a very clear decision. They say that sometimes the dance chooses you, and I believe that when it comes to myself. It's just something that I was born to do.
You said earlier that you try to create movement from a really honest place
Mhm.
and from some like reality. I would love to know what types of stories, either from your life or just around you, inspire you to make movement and dance. What are the stories that really get you going?
I mean, I had an acting teacher that just said you always have to keep your eyes open and be you have to see what's happening around you. And those stories, there's a lot of stories to be told. Whether you're sitting on a subway and you see, a mother taking care of their little girl, or you see a relationship falling apart in the subway, or,
Yeah.
anything could possibly happen. And some of us, just keep our shutters down and we keep walking. But it's important to see what's happening around the world. And I don't tend to create work that's very abstract. It always usually comes from a narrative or a life experience. And I've done, just different works about, whether it's about widows or it's about men their finding their strength, or the last piece I did for Cincinnati Ballet was Pursuit, and that was about women kind of taking control of their power and understanding how they can use their power amongst men. So it's I'm kind of, there's just like a film director, or even a musician, you find these stories to to create, and you want to be able to kind of expose them as honestly as possible.
So it's awesome because your answer reflects an answer from last time about observation. I think our choreographers, as they're entering their journey, we've now had two choreographers, Taylor last a couple weeks ago, and now Jennifer's saying a lot of her stories come from what's around. So I'm going to encourage all my choreographers out there to keep their eyes open, keep their eyes and ears open so that they can start to reflect those stories. That's awesome. If you have any questions for me or especially for Jennifer, please don't hesitate to drop them in the comments. So we're in the middle of a choreographic process right now. So we're going to ask you about yours. So, we've heard that you get your stories from around you and through observation, but where do you start from there? What is the beginning of your choreographic process like?
I think the concept is super important. What story, or what are you trying to achieve on stage? Because you don't want to be in a rehearsal process where the dancers are looking at you and they don't know why they're doing what they're doing. But I spend about 30 hours looking for music to complement the concept. And once I am emotionally attached to the music and to the concept, I'm able to walk into the studio and deliver phrase work. So the phrase work has to come alive in the studio simultaneously when I meet the dancers. And it will not happen unless I'm emotionally attached to the story.
Wow. So can you define phrase or phrase work for us?
Well, the initial beginning steps of creating movement that can begin to create the story or outline the story.
Perfect.
I think there's different levels to the process. Once the concept and you're emotionally attached is present, when you're in the studio, you have to be able to direct the gestures and direct the nuances and make sure that the phrase work, we're not just doing a développé, we're just not kicking our leg up in the air and doing a pirouette for no reason. And you start analyzing the focus of the dancers and how they're interacting and how they're touching to make sure that it is married to the story and it reads well. Because sometimes I always tell young dancers when they begin to improv, it's one thing to find that freedom and to be able to let go, but it's a whole other situation to transpose that into choreography, phrase work, and not really understand that we're trying to achieve something.
Right. Right.
Because then it just becomes really cool steps.
Yes.
And if you're an amazing dancer, it can be, oh my God, I can't believe you put your foot around your head. But then why are we doing that?
Right.
So it's, it's a process. It's a process, but I do think that when you understand why you're doing what you're doing, then the work begins to change on stage.
So you said you start by looking for music really early in your process. What are some resources that you use to find music, or how do you choose that music?
I just looked to my left, but I have about six massive drives of music, just terabytes after terabytes of stuff that I've been collecting. I used to listen to soundtracks when I was like 9 years old, which probably isn't the norm for a 9-year-old, but I would say pretty much everything. I'm not one to have a Spotify account. I will, if I find an artist that I enjoy listening to on YouTube, usually it says, if you like this, then you'll like this. And like 50 other tracks will come up. And I'm that person that will go through all 50 tracks and figure out what composers kind of lead you into another composer just based on what their genre is. Because I have a hip hop background and I have this classical ballet background, I guess what I like in music has like really strong, it's just very versatile and very two different extremes. And I think the more music that you listen to, then it also allows you to expand on your ideas.
Yeah. So I'm going to remind everyone that I'm Carolyn. I'm here with Cincinnati Ballet and the Story Choreography Project. And Jennifer Archibald is talking to us about her process and choreography. So does your process stay the same every time you create a work, or is it different? How do you kind of manage that?
It stays the same if people don't get involved. It stays the same. I mean, I have, how I approach something is you have your go-to tools. I will say that. But then, in this business, if you're working commercially or if you're working in concert dance, you will have producers and directors that are going to come up with themes and come up with music requests. And you have to be able to make adjustments and make sure that you can still do what you want to do within those boundaries. Yeah. But that's just part of the business.
So we've got some video playing now of Jennifer's current piece. She just did it for New Works. It's called Pursuit. She talked about that earlier. And I think it's going to premiere. It's going to be at another performance, I think, maybe soon, hopefully.
Yeah, I think you guys are doing an outside performance. Yeah, at the park. I don't know the name of the theater, which I probably should.
It's at the Season Go Pavilion. It's outside. So we're super, super excited about that. So just watching some of Jennifer's incredible movement right there in the studio through rehearsal. So you talked about having to kind of manage other people's wants. Mm-hmm. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about that collaborative process. We're learning about collaboration in the story choreography project, working together to create something. So how does that process go down for you? What happens when maybe you disagree, or how do you manage finding some commonalities?
I think that's when you start understanding the business aspect of being a choreographer. You have to be able to pitch your ideas and win people over. You have to be able to negotiate in the sense of, all right, I'll do this, but can I at least have this song? If you want me to stay in that theme, let me pick my song. And I think as you get stronger as a negotiator and you really start understanding who you are as an artist, those negotiations become easier for you in the room. But I will say, I had an example of, I was doing a Quaker oat commercial, and I remember I had all these, contemporary ideas of how we like eat, and with the spoon, and we can move our elbow and our head, and like we were going to make this whole like brilliant abstract way of eating oats.
Right.
And I remember they were just staring at me like, we can't do that because we might encourage the public to hurt themselves while they're eating. And I remember I just looking at them like, this isn't really happening right now, because like you don't think that you have that much power over something simple. We're trying to create a creative commercial.
Right.
And we had to simplify it. We had to make it super simple. And you almost can't look at it as a defeat. You have to say, all right, well, let me go back to the drawing board and try and be as creative as I possibly can within this structure. And that's a challenge in itself. You're given structures when you're in when you're in school, and you're trying to apply whatever assignment to your work. And I think that is a skill in itself, to be as creative as you can, to kind of make yourself feel satisfied with the work that you've produced, to kind of make your client happy, but then also make sure that you feel good about what you've done.
Yeah. We're going to pull in a question from the comments. Sarah wants to know, how do you get creative when you feel less motivated or you're just out of ideas? And this is from Brinkley. This is from Brinkley, who asked the question.
I don't think anyone's out of ideas ever. I think we go through highs and lows, and you almost have to change your way of looking at life, in the sense of just being optimistic and making sure that you realize that that you're talented enough to dig deep and come up with something. I think if you kind of assume that you're in writer's block, you're never gonna get out of it. And it's hard. You could speak to 5 people, or you can speak to your closest and most supportive person in your life, but it really depends on how you can pull yourself out of it. And I think tapping into just being as mentally strong as you possibly can is helpful. For me, sometimes walking away from the work or walking away from your computer is important. I mean, especially, I think I'm getting a lot of questions like that because of COVID.
Yeah.
Because we've been in these isolated rooms, and you're just not in your body. I was talking to dancers this morning where I just didn't feel like I was in my body. And it's very difficult it's just very difficult to get your body to feel the way it felt prior to this COVID transition for us. So I think you can be physical and not always be dancing, like going for a walk, or even if you're going to the museum or finding different outlets of different images can help you kind of take a breath of fresh air and freshen your mind and freshen your outlook on the way you see things.
And do that thing you told us earlier and keep our eyes open for those stories.
Yeah.
You never know where you might find that inspiration. So clear your head and keep open. I love that. So how do you choose different elements to incorporate in your pieces? You said earlier that you kind of like to join hip hop and some of your classical training. How do you choose what kind of elements or different styles to incorporate?
Well, I mean, when I am trying to fuse different aesthetics, for me, it's just making sure that I definitely teach my students to look at their work as an essay. If you have an essay with no punctuation, then it's not interesting to read. And sometimes you just flip the page and the story hasn't resonated or you don't even understand what's happening.
Oh, that is
So
like one of the best nuggets. I love that. And making sure you have that punctuation. That's amazing.
yes, and that's ideally how I've been able to overlap the hip hop aesthetic over the contemporary ballet. Because I used to be at ballet, and I'd just be like, "Oh, we need another hit there in that suspension." And as I was like going through developpe exercises, I was like, I could do this or I could do that. I'm sure I was driving a lot of my ballet teachers nuts, but that's really how I've always looked at it from an aesthetic point of view. And then, of course, I do that as I am working and creating the score so that we're just not watching as an audience member and it just goes straight. It's a flatliner because the flatliners put you to sleep and the flatliners are what make you go into your program and figure out what the next dance is. So
the watch and the cell phone lights come on.
There you go. Yes. So I think it's my responsibility to make sure that I have to keep the audience interested, and I want to make sure that I have dancers that are invested in the work. And in order for that to happen, there has to be different textures and dynamics and different emotional arcs in the work, so that your eyes are open and you are drawn in from as soon as the curtain goes up until the curtain closes.
Yeah. So I noticed that you've choreographed for theater as well as dance. How is it different when you have a story that you have to tell, that, words to a song? What are some of the differences in choreographing for musical theater and just straight dance?
I think sometimes it depends on what you're doing. You have a West Side Story on Broadway right now that is has a much more contemporary feel than what you would see in Aida, or it depends on the music, and it also depends on what the director wants. Your work can all of a sudden become super lyrical, and that may not be what you do, but that's just what has to happen. And I think commercial has, I think, when you're doing Broadway work, your instincts almost become, I'm not big on choreographing 2 words.
Got it.
It becomes so literal that you're like, oh gosh, this is not, it's like, it's hitting you in the head. It's hitting you in the head. And it's a little bit too cheery for me, but I think in the sense of the phrase work may shift into being very literal, and if that's not your thing, you need to figure out how to kind of make it a little bit more. I don't want to say cerebral, because you do have to think about what you're doing when you're doing musical theater, but you can shift it so that you don't always see the same moves that you've always seen. Because sometimes there's there's that kickball change pirouette, and we see it and we know it, and we're they're going to put it there. And you never want, or I as a choreographer don't want people to know what's coming next.
Right.
And that's a challenge when you are choreographing to the words, especially if you know the song. So you're in it and you know the lines, and then you assume that something's going to happen. So that's a challenge. When I was working I was doing Oresteia with the Shakespeare Theater Company in DC, and it was really interesting because I was asked to identify the intention behind every gesture that I created. And that, I used to think that I was able to do that, and now I was challenged to do that on a much, much greater scale. And that's what I basically do at Yale, in the sense of I'm doing movement script analysis. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting when your mind shifts to, we're going to do an attitude turn and a pirouette. And then now when you raise your finger and move your eye, it has to be clear on why you're doing that.
Have you brought that into some of your more dance focused work at all? How
Yes, you do it. You do it sometimes. You've got dancers who are able to understand that intuition and understand. Yeah, they understand those instincts.
Right.
And then you've got dancers where you're like, this might take a couple of weeks. So you gauge on who's in front of you, on what you can pull out.
Yeah. Awesome. I just want to ask the question, what is your number one advice for choreographers starting out? What do you want to tell young choreographers who are just dipping their toes in for the first time?
Oh, you have to trust the process. You have to trust what you do. I find choreographers that do a step and they look in the mirror and they judge it. It hinders your voice. It stops you from continuing to the next phrase. And it also, if you're in a room with dancers, that's when they stop moving and stare at you.
Mm.
So you want to make sure that you are always building into the next phrase. And if you change it the next rehearsal, you can, because you're in charge. But if you stop and judge, then you're going to run into that wall that you don't want to hit.
Oh, that's just the perfect advice, because our choreographers are moving into that experimentation phase right now with their work. So I thank you. It's like you knew, but thank you for encouraging them to try and not judge and trust the process. That's awesome.
Because you can't make mistakes in improv. There's that I've been asked to teach choreography and I'm like, I'm not doing that, because I just, who am I to tell you that move isn't right? So if it's coming from an honest place and that's your story, then that's what it is. And you move forward with it. And everything should fall into place.
I just want everyone to hear that again. If it's your story, no one can judge it, right? It's coming from you. I love that. That's so perfect. That's awesome. So I just want to thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you.
And we can't wait to continue to see your work here in Cincinnati. And storytellers and choreographers, good luck on the next step of the process. We'll see you back here next Thursday again. And then on the 20th, we'll have Jennifer Galanka joining us to talk about creation and experimentation, the end of our process. So thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.